Throughout history, there have been countless unexplainable stories, events, and moments captured on audio. These horrifying tapes were archived, never to be heard again. Until now. These are the tapes of trepidation. Tape number 38. The last time I went trick-or-treating. Not everyone remembers their final time going out trick-or-treating. People often say, one year was fun and the next year it seemed lame. It's always up for debate. At what age kids should stop trick-or-treating? Some people say 12 is too old, while others say they don't mind if high school kids show up at their house, provided they're polite and respectful, of course. My dad always thought the whole trick-or-treating thing was a little silly, but was never against going with me when I was younger. That ended the year I turned 13, and it would turn out to be the last year I went trick-or-treating. Dad informed me earlier in the week that he wouldn't be able to go with me this year. He had to pull a double shift, and that if I was interested in going, he was fine with it, but that I needed to be careful and meet up with some friends. I was filled with nervous excitement. I never thought I'd be allowed to go out alone on one of my favorite holidays. The only problem with my dad's requirement was that, truth be told, I didn't have a lot of friends. I never talked to my dad about it, but I was pretty much a loner at this point in my life. Sure, I had a few schoolyard chums, but we weren't really on the trick-or-treating together level of friendship. So against my better judgment, I lied to my dad and went solo. Vampires were all the rage this particular year. It seemed like every other kid at my school had plastic fangs, long black capes, and horrible Transylvania accents. I want to suck your blood, blah. You know, the corny ass vampire Dracula voice. I, however, decided to go against the grain and dress as my favorite monster, a werewolf. Dad spared no expense, getting me a full body costume with realistic fur and all. I even had a full face mask, if you can believe that. I was excited. This would be a night I'd remember forever. Little did I know how right I was about that. After Dad set out, I made a little map of all the houses I wanted to hit up for candy. My neighborhood was decent, but I had heard rumors that houses on Stevenson Road gave out full-size candy bars, the holy grail for a kid on Halloween. Sure, that street was about a 20-minute walk, but I figured if I got through my neighborhood early enough, I'd be there and back before it got too late. Dad said he would call the house at 10 o'clock to make sure I was home. If I wasn't there to answer, I'd be in trouble. A surprisingly crisp air blew past me, bringing the smell of distant candles, pumpkins, and sweets with it as I walked down the street to my first batch of houses. Kids were gallivanting around in sugar-induced hyperspells, parents desperately trying to keep up with them. the occasional older sibling trying to convince their younger, more gullible sibling that a pack of raisins was a fair trade for a Snickers bar. I was overwhelmed with joy at the atmosphere around me. After about an hour, I was nearly done with my neighborhood, and the haul was sweet. My makeshift pillowcase bag was just over halfway full, a sizable haul for me. It was about 8 p.m., and I debated whether or not I even needed to go to Stevenson Road. After a brief inner monologue about this likely being the final year I was trick-or-treating and missing out on my last chance to get full-size candy bars, I began the trek out of my neighborhood. Once I made it to my destination, the reward was oh so sweet. Not only did all the houses have full-size candy bars, but they each gave me 2. My bag filled up pretty damn quickly after only half an hour. A few of the people asked if I was alone. They seemed concerned, so I lied and said my dad was just down the road in his truck. I'm not sure why I lied. I guess I was afraid one of the more overzealous parents would want to go with me, or even take me home. I couldn't have that happen until I hit every single house on the road. After the final house, I made my way back down the road as a few of the houses began to turn off their porch lights, cloaking the road in darkness. It was a little after 9 p.m. now, so as long as I made my way home, I'd be back in time for Dad's 10 p.m. check-in. If nothing else, Dad was always very punctual. And I realized now a part of him was likely still worried for me, even if he did think I was with friends. While I was making my way home, a cold wind blew past me. It sent a chill down my spine and made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I told myself this happened due to the cold, but walking back to my neighborhood on that dark road all by myself, I suddenly became frightened at my situation. I picked up the pace a little, yearning to see the streetlight at the beginning of the stretch of houses that made up my neighborhood. The sound of my heavy breathing and footsteps was the only noise I heard while I walked. Suddenly, a sound came from somewhere nearby. I could hear music. But not just any music. Halloween music. I stopped and listened for a moment to determine where it was coming from. It seemed to be coming from just ahead. Confused, scared, and a little curious, I made my way over to see where the music was coming from. Just past the trees, I could see the glow of a porch light, and I made out an old gravel driveway. I stopped and looked upon a house that was done up with all manner of decorations and lights, and it even had a speaker playing the fantastical, creepy music. I was in absolute awe of the marvelous home before me. It took me a couple of minutes to realize that I hadn't noticed this house on my way to Stevenson Road. Surely I wouldn't have missed this spectacle as I walked by. I chalked it up to the lights having been off, thinking maybe the owners of the home were late getting off work. Stranger things have happened. While I was thinking this over, I noticed a man sitting on the porch with a big bowl. We made eye contact, and he began to wave at me. At first to say hello, then to call me over. He was smiling, and seemed nice enough. Just a normal older man in jeans and a rather ugly pumpkin-colored sweater. I looked at my watch. It was only 9:24, and I was nearly home. Surely one more house wouldn't hurt. I walked down the gravel driveway to greet the man, making my way up the steps to his porch. It creaked under the unexpected weight. The man stood up, setting the bowl down and using a cane to help support himself. He smiled as I held up my bag. "Trick or treat," I said warmly. "Oh my," he stated. "A wolf man. It's been a while since I've seen one of those," he said with a friendly chuckle. I was a little unsure what to do next, so I laughed and responded. "Yeah, werewolves are my favorite," I said proudly. The old man leaned in and whispered, "Can I tell you a secret? They're mine too," he said with a chuckle as he reached for his bowl, stopping suddenly. "Oh dear," he said defeated. "How did I run out of candy already with the late start I had? Guess I'll have to go grab some more from inside," he said as he began to slowly make his way to the door. He gripped the handle, and it opened with a loud creak. Stopping in the doorway, he turned to me. "Why don't you come in for a sec, son? Get out of the cold while I fetch some more candy for you." Looking back at this moment as an adult, I know how insane my next actions were. But I was just a kid. I was trusting. The man had never been anything but kind to me at this point. And living in a rural area, we're always taught to be polite. "Oh, sure, okay. Thank you, sir," I said as I followed the man inside. Walking past the threshold of the door, I felt a chill go down my spine as the door shut behind me. I shivered as I looked around. But there was nothing odd about the inside of his home. Sure, it was a little unkempt, but so is my dad and I's. So it didn't seem strange to me. The man turned to me with a smile. "Why don't you have a seat? I'll just be a moment," he said, trailing off as he walked into another room. Sitting down on a chair, I waited for the man to bring me my goodies. As I sat looking around his home, I noticed a rather odd smell in the air. At first, I couldn't place it. Then after a few minutes, I determined what the smell reminded me of. Pennies. A strong smell of copper filled the air around me. But I was unsure what else smelled like that other than the now obsolete 1-cent coin. God, if I'd only known, I would have ran out of that fucking house right then and there. I sat for what felt like an eternity while I heard the man shuffling around in the other room. After a while, I heard the man yell from the other room.
"Do you think you could come help me for a second? I can't seem to find where I put my damn cane,"
he shouted, clearly frustrated. I let out a sigh and stood up, walking towards the room his voice was coming from. Walking down the hall, the smell was getting stronger. It was almost unbearable. With the final step, I turned into the room the man's voice was coming from. As I stepped into the room, I looked down at my watch and noticed that the time still read 9:24 p.m. I stared at it, thinking maybe my battery was dying. I heard a weird squishing sound as I walked and looked down at my feet. Covering my shoes was a sticky, thick layer of blood. I had never seen much blood before, aside from a small cut here or there, but I knew what it looked like. And there was so much of it. All over the floor. And all over my shoes. I felt my skin grow pale and a cold sweat hit me as I slowly lifted my head. The sight that my 13-year-old self was met with was indescribable. but I'll do my best to explain it. Hanging from the blood-soaked ceiling by large improvised hooks were dozens of horribly mutilated corpses. Their flesh had been torn away in strips, and there were large bite marks and spots all over their bodies. Blood was still oozing from several of them into a pile on the floor. There were children, teenagers, and adults, all dead. All with the majority of their flesh missing. A couple of them were even missing their eyes. Oh God, the way those eyeless corpses looked. Their mouths wide open as if in a silent scream capturing their final moments of life in horrifying pain. I was too scared to even make a sound, and too sick to my stomach to even throw up. I took several steps back as I began to hyperventilate, a fear beginning to take over. Suddenly, I bumped into something, and I felt a strong hand rest on my shoulder. I nearly screamed as I slowly looked up to see the once kind-looking old man smiling down at me. He had blood all over his face and bits of flesh in his teeth. His eyes were now pure black, and he didn't need his cane to support his weight. I was horrified. Tears began to fill my eyes as the man opened his mouth impossibly wide, ready to take a bite out of me. I tried to run, but his grip was too strong. It was as if I was being held in place by chains. I closed my eyes, hoping it would be over quickly. I wished at that moment I had just stayed home, where my dad could have been with me. Suddenly, I heard a weak gurgling yell come from the room behind us. It yelled. I opened my eyes and looked to see that one of the bodies hanging from the ceiling was trying to free himself, making as much noise as possible. More skin tore from his back as he wiggled to get loose from the hooks embedded within him. He yelled again, this time with such force as if any life he had left was being used to make the sound. I looked up at the old man who was looking over at him, distracted, and his grip loosening as he debated on going over to the man who was now taunting him. This was my only chance. I slipped out of his grasp and ran faster than I ever had before. I made it to the door and flung it open. I threw myself out, but I felt something grip my lower leg. As I fell onto the porch, I looked back to see the old man had slipped on the blood chasing after me. It was now covering him in head to toe. He held a large hook in his hand that had some kind of a razor blade at the end. As his eyes grew even darker, his mouth opened wide as he let out a demonic bellowing screech. With tears in my eyes, I hit him again and again and again until I finally kicked him right in the eye, causing him to recoil. I threw myself off the porch, got up, and ran down the driveway. I didn't stop running until I reached my driveway. By the time I had arrived, my father was in the driveway, getting ready to get in his truck to come find me. He began to yell. I just ran to him and hugged him. I was crying and wailing in fear. This caught him off guard, and any anger he had for me missing my curfew by almost 2 hours, I would later find out, vanished instantly. He took me inside and looked me over. The fur of my costume was covered in blood. He tore it off me and looked me over, tending to a large scratch on my leg. After comforting me, he asked me to tell him what happened. I could barely form words. But I managed to get out that a man down the road did this, and that he had real dead bodies hanging in his house, and that he was eating them, and that he tried to eat me. The large scratch and real blood all over my costume was evidence enough for my dad to call the police. They investigated the area for the remainder of the night. The next morning, a rather annoyed police officer asked me some generic questions. It seemed that they had looked up and down the road all night for this so-called house, but couldn't find it. They had me show them exactly where it was, but it was gone. I couldn't explain it. I knew that what I had experienced was real, and I had the bloody costume and scratch marks on my leg to prove it. The police chalked up to a prank gone a little too far and called off the search. Dad never doubted me, but there was only so much he could do. Over the next few years, sometimes late at night, he'd get in his truck and would go up and down the road looking for this mysterious house. But he never found anything. He spent years trying to find it, or the man I described. I know he never forgave himself for not being there that night. Although, I'm not sure if things would have been any different. Maybe we would have avoided the house altogether, or maybe we would have been traumatized in this together. Or much worse. Halloween was never the same for me, even after seeing several therapists. The idea of leaving the safety of my home on that night, or most nights for that matter, seemed impossible. Now, all these years later, I still think about that night a lot. What was that house? What was the creature inside of it? Does it only come out on Halloween? I'll never have any answers. But most of all, I think about that man who saved my life. It was likely the parent of a child who had just wanted to go trick-or-treating and thought the house looked like a good stop. They were lured in, like a moth to a flame by all the mesmerizing lights and decorations. And even with a pain that must have been absolutely unbearable, that man saw that the creature was about to kill another child and wouldn't stand for it. That final act of defiance and courage saved my life. He was a hero. My hero. I just wish I could thank him. Or, even better, that I could have saved him. Survivor's guilt is a hell of a thing to live with. The only thing I have left to say is this. If you're walking down a dark road on Halloween night, and you come across a marvelously decorated house and a nice old man who invites you inside, run. This has been tape number 38, The Last Time I Went Trick-or-Treating by the Tapes of Trepidation Horror Narration Podcast. The Last Time I Went Trick-or-Treating was written by TJ Hodder and was originally posted on the No Sleep, Scary Stories, and the Dread Files subreddits. Narration, production, and sound design for this episode was by TJ Hodder. Credit for music used in this episode can be found in the show notes. The Tapes of Trepidation theme was written by the incredible J.M. Scherf. All logos, banners, overlays, and graphic design work was provided by the talented Jason Reese from Jaybird Digital Arts. A big thank you to Jason for his assistance on the episode artwork for this episode. If you have a story you would like to submit or a question regarding the show, please contact us at tapesoftrepidation.podcast@gmail.com. Support the show by subscribing and leaving a rating on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, your favorite podcatcher, or like and subscribe on YouTube. Be sure to tell your friends. Word of mouth is extremely helpful to a new podcast like this one. Check us out on social media through the link tree in the show notes. We have Facebook, Instagram, and Discord. And if you'd like to support the show a little more, consider joining the Tapes of Trepidation Patreon, where for as little as $5 a month, you can gain access to bonus monthly short story narrations, of which there were 4 this month, the weekly behind-the-scenes podcast within the archive, and more. Come, join us, and become trapped within the archive. Just like my current patrons, Neil Skarupa of Neurotic Voice, Doozer Pindan, Ronan Kamori from Baseline Feed, Eric Phones, and Patrick Stewart. Thank you all so much for the support. All content used on Tapes of Trepidation is either original, used with permission, or is available on your Creative Commons share-alike license. All rights reserved, unless otherwise stated. This podcast and its content may not be redistributed or rebroadcasted without the express written consent of Tapes of Trepidation and the story's author. Thank you so much for listening. Oh, and
Happy Halloween.